Morning, everybody. My name is Sanjiv Anand. I carry the fortunate title of being chairman of Cedar. I wasn't here last year, but I was told it was such an amazing event that it was my loss. And so I said I must be here. I've obviously been to Muscat over the years, and Muscat is as beautiful as ever. And the weather is getting better, so it was nice to sit outside yesterday for a meal. I was also told unless I speak for a bit, I can't get breakfast or lunch. So I'm going to take a few minutes and chat with all of you today. I know and I recognize many of the banks in the room today, even though I haven't met many of you, to some of you. But I have been to your offices and I have some context of the banks in the room and the market. And so hopefully, whatever I say will resonate. I'm not a tech guy, and I know this is a tech conference. So the panels and Chetan and the other partners at Cedar are going to do a much better job than I can talking about technology, right? But technology is obviously, the reason we have technology is to build business. And so what I thought is to talk a little bit about business today, not just in the context of Oman, but in the regional context. And I actually told the guys that when they did the deck for me, is to do like a 10-year snapshot, right? Sometimes we get very carried away with this quarter, last quarter, 24 months. I think Islamic Banking was launched in Oman around 2013, somewhere to that effect, right? And I do remember coming in here and making some comments to various CEOs about what I think would happen with Islamic banking in Oman. So for me, 2013 or having a 10-year snapshot was interesting. So I'm not going to present too many slides, and I've been given, I think, 20 minutes, so I'll try to move it quick. But hopefully you enjoy it. So let's take a look at a few things, right? So again, look, I think everybody knows this, but I think we all know that we operate in a region and we work across the region. And the good news is that whatever you see this morning is going to be made available to all, so we don't need to look at every line item on it. But I think the important point here is that obviously we know that Oman is about 6% of the GDP in the region. And as we all know, Saudi Arabia is half of it. It's almost a bit of a Bank Muscat situation in terms of share of a market and in share of a GDP perspective. On the right, if you see the 10-year data, without going into every line item, I think the one that stands out for me is the foreign direct investment number. Right? And I think there's a lesson and there's an implication there. I think the current ruler, and I think he has a gentleman who's been put in charge in Oman of trying to push FDI. But I think there's an underlying lesson in the growth story that we see across the region, where foreign direct investment has played a significant component in the growth of the countries, right? And I think that's one thing I think the Omani government also is looking at, how can we do it better? There are many ways to do it, right, depending sector by sector, right? So I think one of the things that has driven growth in the region is the amount of foreign capital, foreign direct investment that has shown up. And are there areas as a country that we can do better in? Yeah. Again, this is just giving you a sense of assets per branch across a few GCC countries. The one number that strikes out to me is the banking assets to GDP, which is hovering around, it's at 1.8 for the region. You look across the world, and this number can go up to between 4 to 5. And the implication of that often is that, has the country, has the region been able to attract a large number of assets, right, quasi to their GDP, which also shows the growth and scale of the GDP, the banking market. And so it's a very good number as an indicator on, so you saw one comment on the FDI. Now you're looking at a second comment on, is there headroom left from an Omani economy standpoint, yeah, to drive this number towards 2 to 3 to 4, which will obviously give a lot of depth to the market, right? And I think we all know that depth to this market would be very useful because there's a significant dependence even today in the oil and gas business that exists in Oman, this has always been a fascinating story for me. I was part of the early journeys in the mid-90s for Dubai Islamic Bank and Emirates Islamic Bank, where they were very conventional Islamic banks, and they were very traditional customer service, very warm. The Sharia committees were more rigid. They were more difficult in approving products. And at some point, obviously the marketplace started to move. And if you go back to 2013, for example, the GCC was at about 26% of banking being Islamic. Obviously, at that time, being driven by Saudi Arabia. And the other countries said, listen, how do we, there's obviously a sentiment towards Islamic banking, whether it is for pure religious reasons, or whether there can be better customer service, or whether there can be better pricing. And this has continued to grow, right? It's got more and more sophisticated. That number has moved from 26 to 30% in the region. But obviously, the size of the banking asset books has also grown quite significantly. And I was yesterday in a meeting with one of the local CEOs that runs an Islamic banking business. And I think currently, Oman is sitting at about 15% or so. And so I think this is still a journey that has got some significant headroom for Oman. The challenge that is always there is, when you're a pure play Islamic bank, your messaging to your customer, your value proposition is relatively straightforward. It's when you have Islamic windows, whether you offer conventional and Islamic, is how do you handle that? I'll give you an example. Commercial Bank of Dubai, for example, has had an Islamic business for many years, but it never really goes anywhere because the word commercial in the name of the bank is seen to be a turn-off for Islamic banking customers. And it's small nuances like that sometimes, right? It doesn't need to be anything more complicated, right? So I think this is an area still that has headroom, can evolve. I was in another meeting a couple of days ago, for example, in the UAE, the banking business is 30% Islamic, but the insurance business is only 15%. Right? So then you kind of wonder that, why this difference, right? You would expect all of it to keep up together. So anyway, it's a space, I don't know how many in the room today focus on the Islamic side of the business, but I think this is something that if I was to pick 3 or 4 areas that potentially provides growth opportunities in interesting ways, this is one of them, There's going to be a lot of conversations today and good moderation and good panelists on technology, so I'm not going to do more than one slide. Obviously, what we are seeing is a 70% preference for online banking. There's no rocket science to that. We're seeing obviously a rise in app usage, and everybody wants everything instantly nowadays. So it's an instant payments option. So the trends are obviously very heavy, technology-driven, not just for productivity and efficiency, but more for growth, right? And addressing the younger generation's needs. And I'll make some closing comments about that before we close today. The other thing that is becoming quite obvious is consolidation, And for many years, I started to fly into the region in '99. It just amazed me on the number of banks that existed. And obviously, as we know, the history of banking in the region, it either starts with the government, and the government has, let's say, a large bank and a small bank, and then it's an Islamic bank, and then it's, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Dubai, or one in one part of the country. And then sooner or later, local businessmen, depending upon the regulatory framework, will set up their banks with some support. And so most countries, and when you have good liquidity in the market, there is a tendency to have a greater supply of many things, including banking services. right? At one point I saw there was almost 7 times supply to demand in terms of products available in the market. Yeah. So that kind of reflects here a bit on what we've seen historically, and we are clearly seeing a trend across the region where I think governments for various combinations, and it's not necessarily because any of these assets are distressed. I think they're coming to that logical point that, to be competitive in the region and to be able to be more efficient, it does make sense to kind of start pulling things together, right? So you obviously in the Omani context, I don't need to see, you see OAB and Ali's, Sohar, and then in UAE, you saw 2016 NBAD, First Gulf, which is now FAB. Then Noor went into Dubai Islamic, Saudi, British, and Alawal, NCB, Samba, Gulf Finance House, Al Khair, Al Salam, Itmar Holdings, Kuwait Finance House, Al United Bank, Bergen, United Gulf, and Masraf Al Rayan Al Khalijiya, which is Bahrain, I guess, or Qatar. So again, I think another big rock or a trend, and we still are in client situations, for example, in Kuwait, I think so, where we are seeing 2 more mergers about to happen. So I don't know what will happen, what the regulator thinks in the Omani market. I mean, we do have a large number of banks here. There has been some mergers, but it is clearly a trend that one needs to kind of watch for. Look, I will take, Oman better than I do, so I won't risk trying to sound over-knowledgeable on this. I can just talk, the benefit I have is to talk from the distance a bit. And I think clearly we still continue with a very high dependence on oil and gas in terms of GDP share. That really stands out. I mean, we've had over a 10-year period, a healthy growth in GDP. It's not been significantly higher or lower than what we've seen across the region. We obviously have the benefit and the challenge of a reasonable sized population. Generally, it's a benefit. It's a question of how do you leverage a young population. Many of the other fellow countries in the region obviously have much smaller population, and to a certain extent, the opportunities, in my view, the challenges are also fairly controlled. I mean, for many years, I'd be given examples of what a great job that Singapore does, right? But at the end of the day, Singapore is one city, and while they've done a great job of it, the social challenges, the cultural challenges, the business challenges, the educational challenges vary quite significantly. I mean, the other comment I would make with regards to this is, over the last 10 years, we've seen other countries look for pathways to growth, right? You can clearly see Dubai focusing on the tourism angle. You can see Saudi trying to do a complete rehash and a complete transformation of its country across all sectors. Some have attempted light manufacturing. Some have initially used education as a sector to grow. I mean, at one point, the UAE has over 250,000 students who are expat. Yeah. And that's obviously an industry by itself. The UK and Canada to a large extent dependent on foreign student education for pretty sizable income and contribution to economy, right? So, I mean, it's interesting. It would be interesting. I know the new ruler has been working to kind of take Oman to the next level, and I think there are multiple pathways to do that. And hope is that the next 5 to 10 years, some of these things start to accelerate in a direction or two, right? It can't always be only real estate. I mean, it has to be other pieces. This was very interesting to me. I mean, as I said, I was doing a few meetings with bank CEOs yesterday in Oman, and I looked at a few metrics of the bank, and then I started to look at the numbers. And what was interesting is almost every bank was operating at an LDR over 100%. And that's not unusual, right? I mean, it is unusual. In essence, what it means is you pretty much lent as much that you could lend relative to the deposit you have. You could go to 110, you can do a bit of that, but it simply means that the headroom to lend is somewhat constrained. And then that therefore has other kinds of implications on capital and investment in the banking sector, and how much equity is in there, and because it's all connected to capital adequacy, it's all dependent on how much liquidity is in the market. Yes, people do try to take one another's deposits by pricing and whatever else you do, but the fundamental challenge for the sector as a whole is that the LDR numbers are quite high. And so there needs to be some kind of solution around this going forward. It's floated, as you can see, during the COVID period, it went to 107, 108, right? It's somewhat back now. So that's something that stood out. The cost to income ratio is another thing that continuously stands out in Oman. I mean, part of it is, the more technology you do, the more efficiency comes in. But I also recognize that there is a government and social responsibility for employment. And this is true for all countries, right, with young populations, right? So this is kind of a balancing act, right? And the only real solution I see around this is growth, rather than saying, beyond a point. What I may have done in some other countries is go very aggressively on headcount reductions and so on and so forth, saying, look, that's the headcount, let's develop that headcount, let's build the business. Yeah. Whatever businesses that require less capital, the better it is, because then we hit in the LDR issues and the other issues. For example, trade is a classic example that with less capital, but many ways to kind of build that business. So this is still, I think, on the table. This has been on the table for a few years, the cost to income numbers, and getting the income to go up rather than the cost to come down significantly is, I think, what the thinking should be here. This just, again, you guys know better than me, it was interesting. Of course, there are some pure play Islamic banks, and then there are windows, and I've already spoken about this a bit. I clearly see this as a very long-term and solid opportunity. And I think there's headroom left for growth. People always worry that, will my existing conventional customers be cannibalized? May happen. I'd rather you cannibalize your own customer for your own Islamic bank rather than somebody else take it. I think technology is playing increasingly a role in this space. I talked to Chetan, and he talks about all these core banking systems that historically did not have Islamic-oriented core banking solutions that now obviously offer all of that, right? So if I just summarize in the last couple of pages, and then we're done. There's obviously, if I look at some key learnings that we get, lifestyle banking, and I'll come back to lifestyle in a second. Personal financial management, nothing unusual here. Fintech partnerships, I was having a conversation with two gentlemen from Bank Muscat outside, Ahmed and Qasim, and we were talking a bit about fintechs and how fintechs can help cost effectively and rapidly meet some of the opportunities that may be there. And I think there'll be a conversation about, in fact, they reminded me that there's a panel today on fintech conversation. So I think I'll also pick up some learnings from there. I think omni-channel has always been needed for a great customer experience. Self-service, the more service you can push to the customer, the lower cost you carry. That's just a guiding principle. I mean, even across sectors, right? I remember in the US, if you wash the car and bring it back to the car rental place, you pay less money, right? I mean, so it can get into situations across sectors. Super apps, obviously robotic automation, there's a bunch of AI kicking in. We'll be having some conversation about that today. I mean, the branch networks is a reality of Oman just because of the size of the country. So, we've had clients in the UAE, like Muscat, who went from 54 branches down to 13 or 3 now. Right? But they've still grown quite significantly. So there is a pathway to growth without significant branch presence. And of course, there are multiple branch models, from kiosk manned to kiosk unmanned to, you can do small format, large format. I think the reality is that even e-commerce companies that sell product almost 100% online still will have some physical presence. So I think the need for physical presence, whether it's used for sales or service, is a separate conversation. And I think especially in the Omani context, I think having a smart network of outlets, I think is key. Question is, what do you do with them, right? Non-core outsourcing, there'll be conversations on that today. Instant payments, BNPL, as long as you handle BNPL carefully, because it has the challenge of very quickly going out of control and creating a lot of debt in the younger generation quickly, yeah. Again, just from a global perspective, and I want, the customer service piece on transaction banking, financial inclusion, I think that's an important issue even in the Omani context. I come from India, and there's been a significant focus by the Indian government. I know in the Omani, in Oman, there's been tremendous focus over the last year or two to have every child have a bank account. And there's a process that has been gone through, which I think is almost, 97% of the population is now banked. And that's a very, very important step. At the time, the Indian Prime Minister did this 10 years ago, people were laughing at him, but the benefits have now clearly shown that, it's definitely, we need to be able to bank everybody in the country, right? Risk and compliance, AI adoption, and ESG, though it's a blow hot, blow cold topic nowadays, but it's still in there. I think this is the last slide I was going to do. I made a comment to a couple of people I met yesterday about the challenge of banking this generation. So if I'll take a minute on it, right? We all know that we're talking about a Gen Z population and a millennial population. And in many businesses, in fact, if you go to ChatGPT or you go to Google and you say, how do you manage a Gen Z employee? And there's like 5 pages of guidance, that they can't handle criticism, they need to be handheld, their patience is less, if they don't like the job, they will quit very quickly. And there's plenty of stuff out there, some have been. But the challenge for not only banking, but other businesses also, is that this is a population that does not have loyalty in a broader term, right? This is generally a population that experiments. It will experiment in their own personal relationships. It will experiment with the jobs that they work in. They will definitely experiment with the brands that they like or dislike. So the stickiness that one would expect of a traditional customer segment doesn't exist with this group. So the challenge that it brings for whether it's a bank or a footwear company is that if this is a part of my customer base, how long will they stay with me? Will their needs continuously evolve to the point that, it doesn't make sense for us to bank some segment of that? Yesterday, again, in a CEO meeting day before in Dubai, they acquired 300,000 accounts on digital. They're very happy they did it very quickly. And he then said, Sanjiv, 200,000 were junk, because we're not really making money on it, but now we're stuck with the compliance cost. So I feel, that there is a certain behavioral pattern that is there with the new generation of customers, that these traditional concepts we had in banking, we'll bring value to ourselves if we cross-sell, we upsell, we'll hold, the churn numbers will be under. This is the same thing in telecom also. Some of that, no matter what you do with your product, no matter what you do with your customer service, no matter how good your app is, things are going to happen simply because the customer base has different value systems here. So I think this is, it's a bit of unknown challenge, so to speak, right? But something that I would keep in mind, as you build your businesses and you build your banks, and I know all of you in here today play different roles within your organizations. Yeah. So I think with that, I'll close. I think maybe I'm 5-6 minutes over. Hopefully this was a good start to the day. I mean, now it's going to be more and more technology and I'd rather listen than anything else. But again, thank you all for coming. We always have a nice full house in the annual event we have in Muscat. And please stay through the sessions. They'll get better towards the end, or they'll all be good. And obviously hope all of you will be with us for lunch today. Thanks a lot. Thank you.